Well, welcome to a new episode of Trending Topics with PB. It's going to be my last episode for a while, but before this, it's the third episode of the series of New Kids Talks. So, without further ado, welcome, Marissa. We're doing this in person because why not? We live in the same town. We're going to Boston together. Let's talk about it. So welcome to my podcast. I know you wanted to join me on, and I'm happy you're here. So why don't you tell those that will be listening to this episode or watching it kind of your background with New Kids and kind of how you fell in love and how we got to present day before we kind of move along.
All right. Well, I fell in love with New Kids back in 1989. I was 11 years old, and I was on a school retreat with my class, and at the gift shop that was at the place that we were at had magazines and posters of like all types of the Teen Beat, Big Bopper, all that. And I ended up looking through one of the magazines, and the first poster inside the cover was Jordan Knight's face, and I thought he was the most gorgeous man I'd ever seen in my entire life, and I had to know who he was. So I went, exploring through the pages and read the article about New Kids, and I was like, oh my god, I have to know who these guys are. And I bought the magazine, and I went home a few days later and started talking with my friends, asked them if they knew who New Kids was, and they were like, yeah, we know who they are. And they had the tapes back then, and so we're listening to the music on the tapes, we were watching the VHS videos. We had the posters, we had the folders, we had the notebooks. Well, of course, all my friends had that stuff. I wasn't allowed to have that stuff, but it's just, I was obsessed with New Kids, and I'm so happy that I found them, because at the time I was going through a really hard time with school. I was getting bullied almost every day. I got made fun of, so I was having a really hard time, and basically they brought me back to life, because I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to go to their concerts, and as a kid, I never got to go to their concerts because my parents didn't want me to do that. They thought, I have to be like everybody, so, you're not going to go. And, of course, I cried and cried and cried for days. But, growing up, it just, it's one of those things that I just had to deal with it. And, and then back in 2008, I was living in Vegas at the time, and my dad had just passed away in September, and I had to go back to Denver to take care of his, affairs and everything. And I had no idea that New Kids got back together. And so basically, like, it was a godsend that they came back together at that time, because it really helped me deal with, losing my dad and having to go back home and deal with all this stuff. And I finally got to see them in concert in Vegas that October of 2008. And I cried when they came out on stage. And my friends and I were 16 rows from the stage on the floor level. And like the first song that they sang, I was just like, oh my God, freaking ugly cry. But it was the most wonderful concert I've ever seen in my entire life. And I was so giddy to be there. Like the 11-year-old self of me was just like screaming for joy. And then later on that night, they had the after party at Club LAX, which was at the Luxor at the time. And I was having my going away party, because I was moving back to Denver. And my friends at the club actually talked to the New Kids security. They talked to Jared, and then they talked to Earl. And they got me to go over and meet the guys on the other side of the VIP area. And it was a big surprise to me, but I was so ecstatic. And Jordan was the first one I met. And of course, I held myself together the best way I could, but he was like literally 5 feet away from me, and that was the longest walk of my life. I was shaking so bad, but it was so wonderful. Like, it was just, it's so surreal that I actually got to meet him and got to meet John and Joey after. And I met Donnie, and he was like drunk off his ass. And then I met Danny, and he wasn't as nice to me like the other guys were, but it's okay. I was just like, all right, whatever. But from that night, Jordan, Joey, and John still remember when we met in Vegas, and it's really cool because they call me the Vegas girl, but they also know I'm from Denver, so they also call me the Denver girl. But it's amazing to know that they still remember that night. And
all these years later.
Yeah, and especially the fact that they meet a million people a day.
Yeah.
Whenever they are doing the concerts and the tours and everything else. But for them to remember those specific moments, it's really, just intriguing and just mystifying. And I love all that stuff. And
Yeah. So the next night that year, they came to Phoenix, and at the time, I told it on the last couple episodes, but I was at U of A. I came up for the show. Rest is history. But then that kind of started my time of traveling to see shows. So since you at the time you were moving back to Denver, did you think you would be traveling to go to more shows? And then obviously the next year the whole cruise thing started. But before we get to that, I think when the reunion tour happened, we all thought, oh, this is our time to see them. Some knew to go to multiple shows, but it had never occurred to me. Of course, I didn't have the money to go to multiple shows at the time, but it never occurred to me, oh, yeah, you could just follow them and go to shows. And that became the thing. And that's when everybody started meeting each other. And then, like I talked about in the last couple episodes, then social media happened and the rest is history. So when did you start traveling for shows?
Well, I think, let's see, I did the October show in Vegas, and then the next month I was back in Denver and I actually bought a show for the Denver show as well. And I was third row from the stage. I took my best friend from high school, Mandy, with me. And, she thought new kids were okay growing up, but she wasn't into them like I was. And she just sat there and, she had a good time, but she was laughing at me because I was just like, oh my God, I get to see him again, and I was just this giddy little schoolgirl. And my friend just sitting there laughing at me. But she had a lot of fun, she was happy to be there with me to share that moment. And actually at the end of the concert, when they're after they sang Hanging Tough, John recognized me and he was waving at me from the stage, and then he went over and got Jordan and started pointing at me in the crowd, and Jordan was like, hey, and then they turned to Joey and started pointing at me again, and Joey was like, hey. And so it was pretty cool that all three of them recognized me. But in terms of other traveling, I didn't know if they were going to come back, and so I thought, well, in case they do, I want to be able to go to other shows if I can. And I actually ended up going to the cruise the following year. And then when they did their next tour, which was, I think, at the Palms that following year in 2009.
I think it's when it started.
Yeah.
It all blends together.
Yeah, just there's so many. And so I did the Vegas show over at the Palms, and then I went and did the Denver show too a few weeks later. And so I had at the Palms, I was I think I was way up on the second section off the floor. And then for the Denver one, I was 12 rows from the stage. Yeah. But it was a lot of fun, and I wanted to go to more shows, but I couldn't afford it at the time. And then the next couple of years, I was always going to either the Vegas show or the Denver show. And I think I went and did, I don't remember, it's 2010 or 2011. I think it was during the casino tour. That's when they went to all the casinos around the country. And I went and did the one in, I want to say Hammond, Indiana. The Harrah's. Yeah, I did that one. I took one of my friends to the show for that. And we did VIP, so she got to do her first meet and greet. And it was really great because it was close to her birthday, and she had just lost her dad. And so I wanted to do something special for her. And so she, during the meet and greet, she was standing next to Joey, and I was standing next to Jordan, and the three of us are just holding on to each other. We didn't want to let go because then everybody else started running in, to stand for the photo. all three of us were just like hugging each other together. And so she's sitting there talking to Joey, and she's like, "So when did you become all Joe Mac Daddy?" And he's like, "What?" And they both start laughing. And then later on during the show, when they're like doing the more quiet songs, the romantic stuff, it was really quiet in the audience, and she yelled out, "Joe McDaddy!" And he like points to her. He's like, "Yeah," and it was so funny that happened because she wasn't expecting that to happen, and it was so funny seeing that because his expression was like, "Yeah." It was great.
So, I guess, yeah. So we all have these like early memories of traveling and touring.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to pinpoint when we met. If it was 2009 in Vegas, because I didn't cruise until 2014, but then I moved to Vegas in 2011. But I felt like I met you before I moved there.
Probably. Maybe 2010.
Something like that. So,
I think it was maybe the casino tour.
because I know I started going to Vegas and Phoenix shows, just like.
Did you do a VIP at the casino tour?
No. I didn't do a VIP till maybe 2011, 2012. Late in the game.
I think we just started like doing the social media and kind of
Yeah.
know each other on that. So I know Heidi introduced me to you.
Right. So for those watching and listening, so in 2009 is when Twitter started, basically, if you look back in the history of when Twitter, if you Google that. And we were one of the first groups to adopt Twitter. Donnie was the first new kid to join. And then the rest of the new kids joined, and then more and more fans started joining because we kept crashing their website back in the day. In the forum that they used to have where it was like a message board, and it was like so 1995. Anyway, so then Twitter started and social media started, and then it just kind of created this big like networking of fans and people meeting other fans and traveling to shows. So that's why I'm bringing this up, because I was trying to remember, we've known each other this long, and I'm just trying to remember when we met that.
Actually, physically met.
Yeah. Because again, it all blends, and this is 13 years later, which is crazy. So I guess, so since you mentioned the cruise, and we've talked a lot about the cruise on the last couple episodes, since you've been on all 10, let's start with the first one and kind of go down, because I know there are a few people watching this live, and thank you. Shout out to you watching this live. Leave us a question or comment. We'll respond. So let's start with that, because you mentioned that you didn't think you were going to start. We didn't know how long this was going to last. In the beginning, it was a reunion, and we didn't know how long it was going to last. 13 years later, we're going to Fenway in 2 weeks.
Yep.
So talk about the first cruise, because the first cruise kind of, some people knew about it and it sold out real quick because of but a lot of us didn't know about the first cruise. So talk about that.
Okay. So the first cruise back in 2009, it was a whirlwind, and it went by so fast. And I found out about it because I saw an ad. I don't know if it was on the New Kids website or I saw something somewhere, and I was like, "Oh, a cruise! Well, I love the cruise. I used to work for a cruise line in Hawaii for Norwegian, so I was like, I love vacationing. I need something to get away." And so I went online and filled out all my information and signed up for the roommate match. And my roommate was a girl from Birmingham, England. Her name's Victoria, and she and I are still really good friends. We talk a lot on Facebook and everything. And so we get there to Florida, and it was just a crazy just 4-day weekend that was just nothing was organized. It was a big free-for-all. At the time, any events that are in the showroom, minus the concert, was like first come first serve. So everybody was trying to run in there to be on the in the first row, second row, third row. and it was crazy. And then during the parties that night, the theme nights, everybody's trying to, get their way onto the little stage that the guys were at. And I actually got pulled on stage during the first theme night by Donnie, because I was trying to take pictures, and I had, my big camera hanging around my neck, and I had my bag with me, and I was behind this girl, and she was trying so hard to get pulled on stage, but she was being so mean to everybody. She kept like whipping her hair in front of everybody, and Donnie was going by like reaching out, talking, touching everybody's hands and saying hi, and I yelled out, "Hey, I met you in Vegas," and he's like, "Oh, okay," and he like pulled me up on stage, and I just sat there, and I was like, "Okay, now what do I do?" Like, I didn't realize that I was allowed to like walk around and have fun. And he's like, "Put your camera away and go have fun," and he gave me a kiss on the cheek, and I was like, "Okay, I guess I'll go have fun." And so I just sat there, and I was like, "What do I do?" And it was really funny because I saw Joey behind me, and then his dad was there too, and I want to say I met his wife Barrett.
Was she on the first cruise?
I think she was, because there was a lady that looked exactly like her. The only difference was her hair color was different, but she looked exactly like Barrett. So I'm assuming that was Barrett. But I went over to Joe's dad, and I didn't even know who he was. Like, I just started talking to him because, to me, he looked lonely, but he had a big smile on his face, and I was like, "Hi." He's like, "Hi, who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Marissa." And he's like, "Hi, I'm Joey's dad." And I was like, "Oh, nice to meet you." And so he's like, "So you like these guys, huh?" And so we're sitting there talking, and I was like, "Yeah, it's a lot of fun." And so and then I turned to the woman next to me, and she's just kind of looking at me like, "Okay, who are you?" And I'm like, "Hi, I'm Marissa. Like, I love Jordan." She's like, "Oh, nice to meet you." And like, it looked like she was kind of weirded out because I was like sitting there talking to Joe's dad, and I wasn't making a big deal out of it. Like, I was just like, "I'm just here, I was gonna take pictures, but Donnie told me to have fun."
Right.
But yeah.
So I guess the first cruise, and a lot of this footage is actually on YouTube for those that are listening that want to find out. But yeah, compared to what the cruise is now, which we'll get to, the first cruise, there was nothing planned. It was just,
It was a free for all.
yeah. So the energy was basically by the fans more than it was the new kids that year, because they didn't really, other than the concert and maybe the photo op, they had nothing really planned. So, and it was a different ship the first year, right? It was a smaller ship.
Yeah, it was a really tiny ship.
Okay.
Yeah, the ship was really small, only held 2,000 people.
Okay. So the next year,
it was on the same ship.
The same ship, really. So because if you look at the videos on YouTube, didn't it have like a cabana thing in the middle of the Lido deck?
Yeah, it did. That's where they would stand during the theme nights, in that little like stage area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second cruise, even though it was on the same ship, was it a little bit more planned? Was there a lot less chaos?
That's when assigned seating finally took into place.
Okay.
So for everything in the showroom, you had to sit in that seat.
Okay. So basically, okay, so then they started really honing in, because after the first year, they realized, oh, this is fun. We could start organizing this better. Yeah. So with the assigned seating and everything on the cruise, why do you think, well, each year started selling out, right? So obviously there's not that much. If you think about it, it's like, what, 3,000 fans now on the cruise? At that time, it was like a little over 2,000.
Yeah, about 2,000 to 2,500.
Okay. So for those that are blockheads that may be listening to this, or even those that aren't, and they're like, oh, a cruise with the new kids, that sounds crazy. I've been on it. We'll get to the one I've been on, but what the it's hard to explain to people.
If you haven't been there, you don't understand.
Yeah. But since you've been on all 10, you know the difference between all of them. So I'm trying to get those that are like afraid to cruise to a little bit more at ease. So being the second year, what started to click?
I think just knowing everything was a little bit more organized and we didn't have to just sit there and wait all day to get a good seat in the showroom. Because so many of us were just sitting and waiting. Like we would take turns, and this is not including, saving the spots for the theme nights at night. But just knowing that there was finally rules that we had to listen to, and that it made everything a little bit more smooth, a little bit more, not so stressed out. And because the first year, like, all the security team, all the Rose Tour staff, they were just, chickens with their heads cut off, running around, trying to get things figured out. Just all of us running all over the place. We're trying to have so much fun, but the kid in us is also like, oh my God, I'm finally on the cruise with new kids, so we're all going crazy. But I think the following years after that initial one, just knowing that, okay, during this time, they're going to have this, and during that time, they're going to have this. And, over here is going to be this. And, especially, I think it was by the third year or maybe the fourth, I don't remember, when Jordan decided to do, like, his yoga thing. And then Joey was doing something else that morning. And then Donnie was doing the back rub thing. So it's just, there's always something to do, during, throughout the day, so you don't have to just be waiting for all of them to just do one thing together. There are separate things to do. So you could spend time actually relaxing on the ship, doing things, hanging out, going swimming, go watch Jordan do yoga, go watch the back rub with Donnie. There was so many things to do. So you just weren't sitting there and waiting. There was always something to do, and I like the fact that they do that.
Yeah. So I guess we can fast forward to the one I was on. I didn't go on. I tried for like 5 years to get on the cruise. It's a whole thing. People also have to remember at this time I had just. Well, first of all, I had just basically by the time I moved to Vegas, I had just graduated college, and it was also the heart of the recession that we had. So that was a good time. And so I was saving up for years to get on the cruise. And finally, after like 7 years of following New Kids, which was in 2014, I went on the cruise and hung out with you and a bunch of people. And I've talked about this on the last couple episodes, because Paige on the last episode, that's when I met her, was first night on the cruise, which is funny because we're all from Phoenix, but it's funny. It's like, oh, you don't meet people until the event because of social media, and then you're friends after that. But let's talk about, since you were there with me, it's hard. I want witness to all my stories now, because most people,
and I'm sober all the time, so I never forget anything.
That's true. I was not then. So that was back in my crazy partying days. So talk about that year. The themes were interesting because the first night was masquerade night, which I loved.
That was great.
And then there was a movie night, which we'll get to, and cowboy night, which turned out to be the best night, but there's a whole story behind that. And then, of course, GPS, which for those that don't know, GPS it's basically like you're supposed to represent where you're from. And it's the last night, and it's usually the party that lasts the long, because it's usually the one when you return to the port. But I feel like I'm spoiling things because in this world of spoilers, but everything's on YouTube. So you can find these videos everywhere. It's not really sacred. What happens on the cruise ends up on YouTube. So let's talk about, I do remember. So the first night was masquerade night. And let's just say I was not sober I'm just going to put it out there. Alcohol was involved. And that was the night that it was rocking on the seas, which was kind of funny because I didn't get seasick and it kind of helped me stay drunk. It was really weird. It was a good night for me, but most people bailed and they had to like go to their rooms. Like the Lido deck emptied pretty early that night.
It did.
Which I guess if you're pacing yourself, you might have. But also, not to put my roommate on blast from that year, but that was also the reason is that night was free drink night. So there's one night where for like when you get to the Lido deck, there's like a couple hours where you can just get unlimited drinks. And my roommate took advantage of that and didn't even make it to the party at that point, which is so sad. I wish she would have. But I had a good night that night. But it was just interesting because nobody really got into masquerade night. And I thought that was going to be my favorite. And I had a mask. Of course, it was hard with my glasses. But I had a mask. I met Billy Jeffrey that night, which...
Yeah, I introduced you to him.
Yeah, you remember it more than I do. So... And then I remember dancing with Joey and then meeting Paige, as I explained in the last episode. So the next night was it Cowboy night the next night, or was it movie night?
Movie night.
Movie night was great because they all came out as characters, and that was literally the year after Brokeback Mountain, and Joe and John and Donnie came out as characters from Brokeback Mountain, and it was a whole thing.
Yep.
Jordan was Tony Montana from Scarface.
And then Joey was I think was he the character from Top Gun?
No, that was Danny. Danny was Tom Cruise from Top Gun.
Okay, and Joey was some type of ship.
Yeah, it was. It was an officer and a gentleman, but it was like that.
Yeah.
He always does old timely characters. It's really funny. Which was great. And then that night also we watched old, like Hanging Tough with them and their commentary.
Step-by-step video. Yeah. I think it was.
We watched that, and they told us behind the scenes. And
Blue Bloods also that night too. I think, was it?
Maybe we watched an episode of Blue Bloods. Well, the movie night I know we watched. You could go find this on YouTube.
I don't remember what we watched.
Yeah, I do remember we watched the old videos, and they did a commentary and the old commercials and talked about how like none of that was like under their control.
Yeah.
And anyway, it was fun because to be in that situation where you get behind the scenes from them, or them just being ridiculous and making jokes, is hilarious. All these years later, but let's talk about Cowboy Night.
Yes.
So what I remember, that was the night your group had the concert. Mm-hmm. And by then I was done with alcohol pretty much. So I was a lot more sober by that night. Oh, I had lost my voice by then. So I decided to stop drinking.
Talk.
Yeah. By night 2, I lost my voice. It's epic, people. You don't even know. So I remember just hanging out on the Lido deck and just eating food and just chilling and not really trying to be a million places at once, which was good because, we staked our claim for the party later that night. So talk about how how Cowboy Night, which was Joey's idea, which 3 people wanted.
Yep.
Nobody else voted on this because I should explain to those listening to this podcast or watching is that cruisers get to vote on themes or suggest themes, or the guys watch on social media whenever it's suggested, and then they kind of vote behind the scenes. And so that year it was not a popular voted theme because it was a poll that came out, like a survey or whatever. So talk about how epic that was.
Oh my God. Like, I have never been into cowboys before, but Lord Jesus, they look so hot damn sexy. I wanted to do naughty things with them. Seriously, like it was one of the most beautiful nights I'd ever seen on any of the previous cruises I've been on. And just something totally out of the ordinary that usually seems very just oh, it's all the same thing, cowboys, whatever. But they just made it look so just, well, like I can't even explain it. Like there's not enough words, but it stole your heart. Like it took you away. And we had, it felt like we're invincible that night, I guess would be the way to put it, because like we didn't want it to end.
That's true.
And then Joey and Donnie were doing fireball shots at one of the bars.
Oh, I
and then Joey got really, really trash drunk, and where we were on the Lido deck next to the pool, there had the little semi stage made up. We're all around it, and Joey went onto our stage.
That's right.
And stripped down to his underwear, and oh my God, we all turned into we all turned into Joey girls that night, and we're all just like cameras, phones everywhere, video pictures of Joey taking it off and jumping in the pool. And
then
good Lord,
right?
Yeah, and then Donnie jumped in the pool after that, but he still had all his clothes on.
That's right.
Yeah, the only thing he took off was his boots and his socks, and then he left everything else on. And he jumped in even with his cowboy hat. But oh my God, like we all turned into Joey girls that night.
That is right.
And his for how close he was to me, his crotch was like literally like right here in front of my face. And I know you were behind me.
That's right.
And then Christy was like,
oh yeah,
barely trying to like hold herself on the stage, trying to take pictures of Joey taking it off. Oh my God, it was
shenanigans.
It was definitely that, and it was so much fun. And the pictures that I took from that night were great, especially from how far away we were from the stage. And at that time they're also filming Rock the Boat.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yep. And so, some of my ex-friends were on that show, and I got a lot of great pictures of them dancing on the stage with the guys and everything. But
yeah, okay, yeah. So that night rings a bell. I probably could watch the videos, but so like Marissa just mentioned, that was the first year. So word had gotten out that this was popular cruise. I mean, there's a lot of artist cruises now, a lot of chartered artist cruises. The New Kids weren't the first one to do it. I know of a lot of other artist cruises. I mean, Kiss does a cruise, and smooth jazz artists do a cruise, and I could go down a list, but we don't have time for that. But the year I happened to finally make it, they decided, hey, we're going to film a reality show. And there's going to be camera crews, and they're going to follow certain people on the cruise, for which you're actually featured on the show. By
yes, I
which, just full disclosure, is not the best experience of the cruise. I'm glad they don't do this anymore, because let's just say some things are staged when there are camera crews around. So, yeah, it is mayhem and a blast, but the very first, they did it twice, by the way. They did 2 seasons of it.
Yeah, they did one the following year too.
So you can go find this. It's called Rock This Boat. It was on Pop TV, which is a channel that didn't survive.
That's still alarm.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, you can find the episodes online. You can like order them or whatever. But if I remember correctly, so the day, the photo op day is usually like the 3rd or 4th day. It's usually later in the cruise. And for those that don't know, when you have a meet and greet, or specifically on the cruise, when you go through the photo op situation, it's always 2 people to each new kid. So there's going to be 10 people in the photo. It's a group photo. And it's always mayhem, because everybody wants to stand by their favorite new kid or one they haven't stood by before to meet them. And if you go and watch the show, Marissa is the one that explains this to the world. So, Marissa, talk about the fact that like you had cameras following you that day.
Jesus. All right, so I'm usually not one to, have any anger about cameras following me around. I'm a photographer also, so I'm used to being in front of the camera and behind the camera. But because they're filming this show and they decided to have some of the girls that were on the show, um, a few of them had not found a group yet. And so if you don't find a group, you get stuck in what's called the Room of Doom, which is basically the nightclub on the ship. And you just go and wait there, and people will come in saying, "Hey, I need somebody to stand with Danny, or I need somebody to stand with Joey. I have 3 spots open. Who's looking for a spot?" And so most of the time, what ends up happening is the John and the Danny spots are always the harder spots to fill because for whatever reason, nobody likes to stand with them. Now, for all those who have not yet met new kids or have not been on a cruise, John, out of all the 5 guys, gives the best hugs. He is like master hugger. Donnie too, but John gives the best. And so the girls that were that needed a group, like they went into this room and I was standing there, walking down the line. I had a piece of paper that said, I have, I need 3 spots open for, I think it was Danny and John. And so these girls with the camera crew come over and they're like, "Hey, she has a piece of paper." And so she started asking me, why I have the paper. And so I'm explaining, oh, well, when you do the photo, there's 2 girls for each guy. So it's a whole group photo. And if you're not ready, you have to be over here in the Room of Doom. And you have to wait there until somebody has a spot, or you can go find somebody who doesn't have one and bring them to your group. And so the camera was like right here in my face. And I'm, explaining to these 3 girls. And, after they filmed it the first time around, they asked me if I could be more dramatic with, talking about the Room of Doom. And I was just like, what? And I'm like, I don't need to be more dramatic. I'm just saying it like it is. And they're like, oh no, you just need to be, be like more worried. And I'm like, I'm not worried. And so it was just really weird and very awkward. And so they filmed it a second time, and I was like talking more with my hands to show the dramatic, version. And it was ridiculous. But the girl's really nice. I actually saw 2 of them the following year, and we actually ate breakfast together. So it was really cool. And they're like, yeah, it was kind of crazy after that, but it was so cool to meet you. And thank you so much for, going along with us. And I was like, yeah, no big deal, whatever. But you're nice girls. I really like them. Yeah.
So, well, the reason I asked that is because I have watched the show back because it was the year I went, so I had to watch it when it aired. Mm-hmm. And I get to that point and I see you doing this interview and I'm like, yes, this is correct information, but it's so overdramatic the way they're making this sound. Like, I mean, we call it the Room of Doom as a joke. I mean, it's not that big of a deal to be just pulled into a group because you're on there to get a photo, but it's like the way well, let's just say the first season of that show came out horrible. Let's just say if you go watch the first season of Rock This Boat, some is accurate, and then because they follow groups of fans, and it's your typical reality show, like with the confessionals and the, oh my God, I'm not going to make it to this event. What are we going to do to make it dramatic going into a commercial at the time? And they also didn't have anything accurate from the actual boat. I don't know if they didn't get the rights or whatever, but the cruise director wasn't even the cruise director. They they
used somebody else's voice.
Yeah. And then anyway, long story short, there was just some storylines of some fans that were very suspect, like they were planning. There's these guys that specifically go on the cruise to meet women. From the UK, right?
Yeah, I think they're from England.
Yeah. And while that seemed funny at the time, they also go on Backstreet Boys cruises. They go on all these other cruises, and it's really creepy. But they were two of the people featured on the show. I remember meeting them that year, and they were rude as hell when the cameras weren't on them. So, good luck, ladies. And I'm sure all these years later, it's like whatever. But you also had friends that were featured, and they didn't. It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
And then they did a wedding that year, which was obviously staged because it didn't really go by maritime laws for having a wedding. So they were already married before they got on the ship. But everybody thought they were getting married on the ship because Donnie officiated it, and then Joe walked her down the aisle, and it was this big thing on the Lido deck, which we didn't see coming. It wasn't in the itinerary.
Yeah. That part with Donnie and Joey was not planned. Like, that actually was a surprise to both the bride and the groom. Because I'm friends with Danielle and Norm.
Okay.
And so that was not planned at all. They didn't even know if that was going to really happen. So that part was not planned to be in the show. That was a surprise to them and all of us.
Okay, cool. It just seemed very... I mean, in the time, don't get me wrong, I wish them well in their marriage and everything. Don't get me wrong. It's great that they went on the cruise together, and that her dream came true with Joe walking her down the aisle and all that stuff. But I remember when the one thing I specifically remember is when Donnie came over the PA and said, "Everybody get to the Lido deck now," because there was nothing scheduled that afternoon. And so we were like, we thought it was going to be the back rub. Let's back up to what the back rub is. I think I've explained it on the last couple of episodes, but the back rub was this radio show that Donnie used to do in like 2010. I don't know. Let's just say it was like at least a decade ago now. Mm-hmm. And it was this it's called D-Dub's R&B back rub. And basically he would play R&B slow jams like Art LeBeau, but it was Donnie. And he would have this like relaxing voice. And it was a hit for a while. And it was basically to help Cherry Tree Records have their own radio station called Cherry Tree Radio. And I remember listening to it. And then it became a thing that he would do on the cruise. But they get it out of hand on the cruise because it's like in real life. You're not listening to like a podcast or radio at the time. So we all thought it was going to be a live back rub. So we all rush up to there because what had happened the years before is that the back rub became exclusive.
Yep.
So, you were only invited to the back rub, or it was only first come, first serve to the theater or whatever it was. So again, when I say we were all running, we were literally all running from where we were on the ship to the Lido deck. Of course, if you were already on the Lido deck, good for you. But so talk about like we get up there and we're like, what's going on?
Yeah, so I was up there because I had been swimming in the pool, and so I already had my towel out, everything, and I always have my camera with me because you never know when the new kids are going to be around, take pictures. And so all of a sudden they start setting up everything, like they're blocking off, part of the Lido deck, making an aisle, they're putting like flowers up, everything. And everyone's like, what the hell? And then, when Donnie finally announced, hey, everybody come up to the Lido deck, really quick, blah, blah, blah. And then seeing everybody just all of a sudden just bum rush to the Lido deck. And then they're telling us we have to be quiet, like we can't make a sound. And then, finally, like, they start queuing everything up, and, we see Joey and Danielle, walking down the aisle, and, there's a lot of people that start crying, and there are people who are just like, oh, this is so cool, but everybody had their pictures, their cameras out, video, taking photos, all that. So it was really cool to see that, and then seeing, Donnie officiate, which I think was kind of cool seeing because, even if it was a kind of like not really planned or surprised. Yeah, I mean, it was really cool to see that happen because, we all wish that we could marry a new kid or now to be kind of like married by one. That's really cool. So I thought it was pretty neat to see that happen because it's just something that's, once in a lifetime experience. And it's never going to happen again. But, to have that happen as a surprise to both of them, especially for Danielle, I thought it was really cool to see that.
So, also, if you don't watch the actual reality show, I mean, a lot of this footage is on YouTube. So just literally put New Kids Cruise 2014 and just start watching on YouTube. But there was good and bad. Like, the reason why I kind of have a different experience, of course, like I said, I wasn't sober the whole time, so I don't remember everything. But I think for a lot of us, it was our first cruise. And when your first cruise has a reality show and cameras and people getting in the way and a lot of her, it took a little bit of what I've been hearing about such an amazing experience for so many years, and how it's just something you have to experience, and just, which you still do, don't get me wrong, but when you have to sign a waiver that you could possibly be on a reality show, it's kind of like I felt like there was a lot of reserved behavior by a lot of people. There was a lot of people that were still themselves. But in terms of that year, that was also the year that like family members of certain people were on the cruise, and it kind of changed behavior of how the new kids were that year. And not that they didn't have fun and didn't perform well. It was just the vibe was a little off.
Yeah.
I still had a blast, obviously, because I partied my ass off. But the point is the reason I want to bring up the reality show is that there's good to the reality show. I think it's great that they like tried to show what the cruise was like, what being a blockhead's like on the cruise. But on the other hand, it wasn't completely truthful.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they did a second season and they did the format a little bit different, where Donnie produced it better, and like
it was more about them instead of actual the fans.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's cool that they wanted to follow fans the first year. But I think because we've all been seeing a lot of reality TV at this, even by then, a lot of fans weren't as real. Reality isn't as real as you think it is, and reality TV. And I think that took a lot of fun out of it, because obviously there were some that were like, hey, we're just fans, which were great to follow, and you were happy. Like the two sisters that went, right?
Yeah.
And a few of the others. But the others were like the guys that they followed, those that I mentioned, were they knew they were on a TV show. Let's just say that. And they played it up to the extent that they wanted to. They wanted to be famous from being the two guys that would potentially hook up with fans. And I guess the reason why it kind of rubs me the wrong way is because as blockheads, we're always trying to prove what we have is cool, and that being a New Kids fan, it is what it is.
That we're original.
Yeah.
We're original still. And
I'm cool with people becoming new fans over the years, but it just seems to me like when they mention it on the show and they put them on the show for the sheer fact that they're the two guys that try to hook up with other fans, it takes because not all fans are like that. Like, it's not about that. And I just think, well, obviously by doing the second season, they kind of redeemed themselves. But now that there's not cameras following people around since then, I think it's made it more of the, like, as Donnie puts it, a sacred event. Because, yeah, everybody else has cameras, but it's different when there's like a reality TV show crew, and like you said, they tell you what to say or how to say it. And also, let's just be real, like, we don't sleep on the cruise, okay? So a lot of why it's amazing is because none of us have slept for like 4 days. Or we get...
I don't sleep. I get maybe like 3 hours of sleep the whole weekend.
So when they're like asking you to like to act or to say something, you don't even know what day it is. And they're like, hey, could you say it this way? And it's like, no, I'm just saying what I can.
Yeah. It's like, this is me. This is what you get. What you see is what you get. If you don't like it, there's the door. Get the fuck out.
Yeah, exactly. So, Anyway, I just wanted to tell the story because we were both on that cruise together, and it was just, there's stories upon stories, but it's just, we try to get across what experiencing and being a New Kid fan, being a blockhead is like. And if people don't really get it, to this day, people are like, why are you New Kids fans? Or why do you guys have such passion? And I think unless you've experienced a concert or the cruise or whatever it is, you don't get it. So let's talk about, I kind of mentioned this in the last couple episodes, to get off the cruise subject for a minute. Going to concerts, I know you've witnessed it, but when you see people that have been dragged to the concert with a friend or a family member and they're like, oh, the New Kids, blah, blah, blah. And then they leave and they're like fans. Talk about that revelation, because we've both seen that happen.
Yeah. Okay. So, prime example, my Aunt Barb, who lives in Denver. So she's known me my whole entire life, and she's known I've loved New Kids forever. And so I went to this year that my daughter was graduating high school, so 2019. And usually I go, to the Vegas show and the Phoenix show. But that year I couldn't go because that was the weekend that my daughter was graduating. So I decided, well, if I'm going to go see a show, I'm going to go to Denver for it. And I invited my Aunt Barb to come with me. And so she was like, oh, we don't have to go. It's okay. And I was like, no. And since she thought that, we were going to buy the cheap seats, like be way up in the nosebleeds, the very last row. And I was like, oh, no, we're going in style. So I bought us VIP packages and the meet and greet. And so, we're getting ready to do our photo. And so I introduced her to everybody that was going to be in our photo. And she's like, oh, so you guys just kind of like hang out here, meet everybody, wherever you're going. I'm like, oh, we talk about this for months and months at a time. We see each other whenever we can, not only, here, but we also hang out on the cruise. We pick up where we left off. And so, and she had no idea what was going to happen. She was just like, oh, I'm just here with my niece, no big deal. And that was the first year that the people that do the VIP packages was telling us, oh, you actually get to talk to the guys for a few minutes before the photo was taken. And I was like, what? We actually, we don't have to go, hi, smile, click, bye. We actually get to, have, a actual conversation. Oh my God. It was so unreal. And so I turned to my Aunt Barb and I'm telling her, you actually get to really meet these guys now. She's like, oh yeah, I know. And I was like, no, you get to have a conversation with them. I get to personally introduce you to all of them. So she's like, oh, okay. And she has no idea what's coming. So she and I were going to be standing with John for that photo group. And usually I stand with Jordan. But there's somebody that had never met Jordan before. And so I gave up my Jordan spot so that she could stand with her. And then I was going to stand with my aunt. And so we go into the room, and I introduced her to Danny. I'm like, hey, it's my Aunt Barb. He's like, hi, Aunt Barb. Gave her a hug. He's like, I hope you have fun. She's like, oh, thank you. And then we meet Donnie, and I was like, Donnie, this is my Aunt Barb. Aunt Barb, this is Donnie. And she's like, oh, hello. And he's like, hi. And he gives her a big hug, leans her back into his arms. And so she's like, oh. And she goes, how do you do this every night? She's like, don't you guys ever sleep? And he goes, I never sleep. And I was like, I can vouch for that. And he and I just kind of looked at each other and started laughing. And he gave her a kiss on the cheek, and he's like, it's so nice to meet you. And I happened to be wearing my my all-time cruiser jacket that they gave to us for all the people who have been on each cruise, which is also this shirt too. And so he looks at me, he goes, I love your jacket, you 10th or you. And so he starts going like this to my jacket. I was like, I love you too. And so he gave me a hug and a kiss. And then we moved over to Jordan. And I was like, hey, Jordan. He's like, hey. And I was like, this is my Aunt Barb. He's like, hi, Aunt Barb. And he gives her a hug. And he goes, I'm her favorite.
That's awesome.
And so she's like, "Oh, you're the one that she's loved for all these years." And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "It's so nice to meet you." And she's like, "It's so nice to meet you too." And he's like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "I'm fine." And I give him a hug, and he gives me a hug. And I was like, "Okay, see you later." And he's like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "So you ditched me on the cruise, and now you're going to ditch me here. Because on the 10th cruise, I actually gave up my spot for some, to let them be with him, and I stood with Danny." And I was like, well, there's somebody new here that hasn't met you yet, so I let them have my spot. And so I'm going to go stand with John." He's like, "Oh, that's okay then." But he was like so floored. He's like, "What? You're going to ditch me again?"
That's hilarious.
Oh man, it was great.
Well,
awesome.
Not to bring it back to the cruise that I was on, but now the memories are coming back. So without getting into some stuff that I don't really want to put on the podcast, but the year I went on the cruise, for those that don't know, longtime Donnie girl, just putting it out there. But I don't care who I stand with. I like all the new kids. And the year I went, I decided to stand with Danny that year. And I don't really do it. I never really was a person that did a lot of meet and greets. The funny thing about that, I think I told on the last couple episodes, is that I met Donnie and John in a casino in Vegas around a Vegas show. So I never really paid for a meet and greet until I don't even know. Maybe 2012. I don't know. Point is, meet and greets are great, but I figured out ways to do it elsewhere. It's just because they were very accessible when you go to the Vegas shows. So when I go on the cruise, I stand with Danny. Didn't really care. I mean, I cared about having the photo and being with people, but I mean, I'm not as picky as a lot of fans. Don't get me wrong. Not to put a lot of fans on blast, but some people are like, I have to be with this person every time. It's like, but you've met him 20 times. That's a whole nother podcast. But, so the year I went, I stand with Danny, and I'm literally the last one to because at the time when you're herded out on the cruise, you get in there, people kind of hug, they go pose, they click, you're out. It's like being herded like cattle. So everybody gets quick hugs with everybody, but it's like, it's clockwork. If you watch the reality show, you'll see how they put a time lapse on it. It's hilarious. So I'm leaving, and Donnie goes, "Brooke." And I was like, first of all, didn't know he knew my name, because at this point, he only knew me via social media. And for all of you that don't know, I've been Saxy15 on all social media since social media began. So he used to call me Saxy Brown at first, which is hilarious because my last name is Brown. But then he's figured out my name over the years of just correspondence on Twitter. And he's like, "Where have you been?" As I'm walking out, and I'm like, I didn't have a voice by then. So I was trying to talk and get any sound. I didn't have this voice by then. But and I go, "Just partying on the cruise, having a good time." He's like, "I've been looking for you all cruise." And to me, in my mind, I was like, no, he has. There's 3,000 other fans here. There's a reality show that he's executive producing. He doesn't know who the fuck I am. That's what I was thinking. I know he knew who I was from being a fan, but I didn't think he cared. And so to go back to the story we were talking about, the wedding, is that it turned into kind of a afternoon Lido deck party after the wedding. It was like a reception kind of thing. Not really, but I remember then he went around just kind of taking selfies with everybody, and again saw me and was like, took selfies, and he's like, "Make sure tonight at the theme party I see you. I've been looking for you all cruise." And I was like, again with this, "I've been waiting for you all cruise" crap. So later, fast forward to later that night, GPS night, and at this point, I was represented. I went to U of A, so I had all my Arizona Wildcat gear on, and that night, because what was funny is that I told the story on the last episode. At that time, the kind of like line dance, the wobble was like the hit. And when I was at U of A going to football games, tailgating, you would hear the wobble and like fraternities and sororities just busting out this dance. So I learned it in college. So that year, for some reason, it was huge in the South, but like colleges too. And I remember it played that night. The DJ got around to it that night. And Earl, who's one of the bodyguards, started doing the dance. And then like a bunch of us started breaking out the dance, and it just kind of caught on. And Donnie was floored by this and was like, people know a dance that we don't know? What? And it started a thing that year where like the wobble has now been featured on every cruise. But it's just weird when you get recognized. You were talking about like in your meet and greet getting recognized, and how like you're like, they don't know who I am. And then you're like, oh my God, they do know. Yeah. So that's what reason why I brought up the story, is because it reminded me of the feeling of when he said, oh, I've been waiting to see you all cruise. And I'm like, when you're in a sea of other fans, well, I can't wrap my head around about other than being like a number. Because sometimes you feel just like a number when you're being herded like cattle through a room. So when it's a situation when you can actually have a conversation like that, it kind of catches you way off guard. And there's so many emotions and thoughts running through your head at the time, because you know me. I'm a cool cucumber. I don't really have that like starstruckness around any celebrity, but like in that moment, I'm like, what is happening? Yeah. So, and I guess the reason I told that story for those that are listening or watching is that that's kind of what I want to convey, is like, yeah, there are a lot of fan to artist relationships out there, and yes, I've taken 6 years off. I've seen a lot of New Kids stuff. I've been to a concert here or there every year that they kind of had a tour, but I kind of took some time off. But the reason I'm returning this year, and we're going to talk about Fenway coming up, is because no matter how hard I tried to separate myself from the New Kids, it's like once you've had these experiences and once you've met people like you, we've known each other for 13 years now, almost 13 years, and you have these relationships, it's just something that is hard to explain to anybody out there that hasn't experienced it. And the reason I wanted to do these episodes of the podcast with such a historic show coming up, well, a couple shows, is because maybe that can convey to people that we aren't crazy, ridiculous fans, that we, for 35, almost 40 years, have been labeled as. Because obviously every artist now has a fan base, and I think people can relate a little bit more if you are a huge Taylor Swift fan or Kanye West fan or whoever it may be. But I think what I want to convey is that being a New Kids fan is different because they left and came back. And it means more now as adults and second generation, and because everything kind of has built on each other. Like we mentioned, the reunion, when it started, we didn't think it would last this long. So long-windedness aside, I just kind of wanted to explain that to people out there of like why we're kind of doing these episodes. So it's kind of, now I want to talk about Fenway because we're going together to Fenway. And for those that don't know music history, Maurice White started New Edition in Boston back in the 80s. They were a group of 5 fantastic black men. Well, 6 if you count when Johnny Gill joined. And then he started the New Kids with Donnie and Mark, Mark Wahlberg being the first members, and then Mark dropped out, and you could read the history on it or hear it from them. But coming up in Fenway, this show got postponed because of COVID. And it was initially with 3 members of New Edition, which is Belle Biv DeVoe, and advertised as special guests. Now, for me, I've wanted ever since the reunion a New Edition, New Kids. Well, they already collabed on a song on the block, which was their reunion album, and they've had a couple pop-up shows here or there where they've had members of each together. But I've wanted a joint tour for now 13 years. And the idea that after COVID, this is one of the biggest shows at Fenway. They're returning home to Boston where they started, and with also having Belle Biv DeVoe, which are from Boston, and especially because it's got to be a New Edition reunion.
Right.
And you know me, that'll get me back. So let's talk about, because I wanted to bring up Fenway and why you've been to the last couple Fenway shows.
Yeah.
And so this will be my first time to Boston, which, yes, long time coming. First time to Fenway. But I also want to experience what it's like for the hometown heroes to be in their hometown venue. So you talk about your experiences going to the past couple Fenway shows, and then we're going to talk about what we hope happens in a couple weeks.
Okay. So I went to the last Fenway show. I went with Christy, and we sat in the pit area that was like right in front of the stage, and it was just cool. Like just that history, just the energy from that baseball field itself is so, it just overcomes you. And you have just an array of emotions. Like I actually cried again when they came out on stage. But like half the people there were like, oh my God. So we're all crying together. But it was just a lot of fun. Like, you know, and Donnie and Joey were just kind of like, oh, you're here. And they shook our hands while they were going through this, dancing on the stage. But it was amazing. Like it's a whole other level of concert because you get to feel that love that the whole city of Boston has for them. Like this, like so many historical facts, come from Boston, the whole East Coast, because that's where everything started for the U.S. But to also know that New Kids also brought another piece of history from Boston, musical-wise, and to be part of that, to be, in the same town of where they came from. And it's just, like, totally just an intense circle of energy around you. Like, it just consumes you, but in the right way, because it's so positive, it's so much fun, it's so much love, and you just don't want it to end. Like, you just go with it. You just let, take over you, and by the time you're done with it, you're just like, oh my God, I want more. Let's do it again. Can you just come back on stage, for another 3 hours? And it's really, really great. Like, I'm so excited. I'm so glad that you get to go this time, and, that we get to hang out all weekend, and we get to meet and see other friends of ours too. So it's going to be a blast. You're going to love it.
I'm stoked because I've had, funny enough, a love for Boston from afar my whole life. And I've wanted to visit that city a bunch of times before this. But I think after having the year we did last year where we couldn't do anything, and it's just politically ridiculous in the world right now, and the fact that this is actually going to happen, because it's been pushed back from the original date even this year. We were supposed to have it this past week.
Yeah.
And now it's pushed to August 6th. I think that's kind of what got me back, along with other things, but specifically just the fact that, like, potential New Edition reunion with the New Kids. I want to experience. I've watched. You can go again on YouTube and watch the Fenway shows. People have uploaded the last couple of Fenway Park shows, and you can see it on the New Kids that, like, when they play Boston, well, they also have played the Garden where the Celtics play, but when they play Fenway, it's a whole nother level of, like, gratitude, and they have all their family and friends there because obviously they all come from big families, and they still have family that live there, or in John and Jordan's case, they still live in that area, or, like, in New England kind of area. And so it just means more to them. Not that other shows don't mean a lot, but you can just see that, like, after they never thought they'd be where they are 35, almost 40 years later, which is crazy even to say because a lot, as I'm talking about this, I think the last Fenway show was about 5 years ago. And so if you go watch the show, they're like, oh, you've been around for 25 years. And that at that time, we were like, oh my God. But here we are.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of wanted to do these episodes to talk about with other blockheads and people that are kind of witness my shenanigans, because a lot of people know me from my other music following. But I think it's important for people to realize that everybody has a different experience, but the reason why there's been such a longevity with the new kids is because of the way they are with fans. Like, we talk about our encounters. I haven't talked about all of mine, but it's another story for another day. So we've kind of talked a lot about like our specific pinpoint, but now that we are going to Fenway and now however long they want to do stuff, what do you hope going forward of events? Because you've been to all 10 cruises. You're going to go on the next one if they have another one. And breaking news, I'm probably going to be on the next one with her. But again, what for someone who's experienced as much as you have and meeting a lot of us and just what it's like, what do you hope for the future with the new kids? Because it's like, I've taken some time off, but I've done some things. Everybody's had their own journey. What do you hope happens?
Well, I hope they still do a cruise at least every year or every other year, because I would like to keep my perfect attendance for it. I literally could buy a house with the money that I've spent on the cruise each year, but it's worth it because how often are you going to say, "Hey, I got to go on a cruise with my favorite band since I was a kid," and you get to party with them the whole weekend. Like, it really is like a huge family reunion. Like, it's not even a normal cruise. Like, I get there and I sit in the sun all day long, and I don't care that I get sunburned. I'm just here to relax and party all night with these guys and hang out with friends and just you know pick up where we left off from the last time we were together. And with the concerts, I'd love to see them, you know, do other bands that, have been around for a while too. It'd be great to see them do a whole thing with New Edition also. And I never really listened to New Edition when I was a kid because I didn't know much of them. But it'd be great to see that. I'd love to see something like that come to play. And I liked it when they were with Boys to Men. That was always fun. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, if they keep doing this, I'll always be there. It doesn't matter how many shows I go to, but you'll definitely see me on every cruise because that's something that I want to make through to each year. And I took my Aunt Barb to the Denver show, like after the show was done, I was because we're sitting in different seats, but we're like one row away from each other. So I was on the floor and she was in the front row of the section right off the floor. So she got to see the stage clearly, and it was so great just seeing her expression because she was just like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, she was so thrilled by the whole experience, and she's like, "Well, when they come again, we're gonna have to go again." And I'm like, "All right, cool." So it'll be great to actually take her and actually try to take my daughter to go at the same time because their birthdays are just a couple days within each other. So I want to be able to have both of them go. So as a birthday present for both of them, and I'm going to try to get my aunt to go on the cruise one year if I can get her, and also my cousin, which is her daughter, to try to go too. But that'd be great just to, bring somebody who's never even thought about doing something like that. Just have them, see it from their eyes, and then they can see it from my eyes. I love doing that stuff, and I encourage everybody who has yet to go to a show or even a cruise, save up your money, do it, because you gotta enjoy life. You gotta make the most of it. Just go for it. Just don't say no. Just say, okay, I'm going to do this. Go out at least once, if not twice.
Yeah, that's what I always said. I mentioned that in the last couple episodes. If you're a blockhead, you need to experience the cruise at least once in your life, no matter what year it is. Because it's 4 days of absolute mayhem.
In a good way.
Yeah. So for those that have been watching this, as you've noticed, to hit up Marissa on Twitter and Instagram at BluedMindFreak. And you know where to hit me up, Sax15, or the podcast, wherever the podcast will be found after this in audio form. The video replay will be up on my YouTube and my Twitch channel for a while. Well, Twitch for a while because it's a whole thing, but YouTube forever. So thank you everybody for tuning in and who will listen to this in the future. And thank you, Marissa, for joining me on the podcast. It was fun. And be safe, everybody. And see you in Fenway if you're a blockhead listening to this.